Gaurav, thank you so much for joining me at LSI in the studio.
Nick, my pleasure.
Why don't you tell me a little bit about the things you're doing over at Formlabs?
Sure. So a bit of background on the organization first, I think. So Formlabs is a roughly 10-year-old company founded by a few engineers out of the MIT Media Lab back in 2011, 2012. We have a mission to make digital fabrication accessible to anyone, so they can make anything that they would like. We started with core focus in traditional engineering industries, so product design, consumer electronics, aerospace, automotive. We entered the healthcare space in 2016 through the dental market. And at this point, we've deployed over 100,000 machines globally, including about 30,000 machines to the healthcare space. We manufacture the 3D printers and materials and provide that technology stack to medtech OEMs of all sizes, biotech companies and startups of all sizes as well. What we call point of care manufacturers. So those are hospitals using patient imaging to create patient-specific devices within the walls of the hospital, and in some cases, replacing devices that they would have otherwise purchased from medtech OEMs. And then we have a lot of university-based and other research institutions using our machines for next gen research in the healthcare space.
That's brilliant. You guys have come a really long way in just 7 years or so, by my math there.
Yep.
You mentioned something interesting about the hospital owning it at the point of care. I'm curious, who owns that process? Why don't you kind of walk through what a hospital can do once they have your technology in their facility?
Sure, yeah, and I'll maybe one level before that is 3D printing historically, I think, has this connotation tied to only for prototyping, only for R&D purposes. As time has gone on and the technology's gotten better and our regulatory team has been built up, and we do have FDA registered 1345 manufacturing facilities, so those materials can be used to produce end use devices at the point of care or by medtech OEMs or the other parties that I mentioned previously. And that's unlocked this can of worms, if you will, that's leading to this question. So if they were only printing tchotchkes or R&D parts, it would be a different conversation. But because they're now printing based on patient imaging, converting that imaging into printable files of patient's anatomy so they can prepare for the surgery more effectively or size an implant on that patient's anatomy before opening the patient up, or designing a patient-matched surgical guide, so essentially a stencil for the surgery, so they know to remove the entire tumor without removing any excess tissue or bone, for example. These are materials that can be sterilized, that are biocompatible and used in the OR, and the process is essentially CT or MR, third-party software to convert that DICOM set into what we call an STL file or an OBJ file. Our software opens that up, helps you with orientation, with some print preview sort of functions, and we provide the instructions for sterilization and all of the data points or the endpoints for biocompatibility as well. So we provide enough information for our customers to have confidence to use materials for any number of ways, and we don't have any, on the medical side, we don't have any specific indications for use or recommended applications. We just say, here's a material that's been tested to be safe for bone tissue dentin contact, which is an official classification of biocom testing, meaning you could consider using this for a surgical instrument or a surgical device or surgical guide or implant sizing device. It's up to you to determine how to make that. And we have what we call workflow partners. So I mentioned before the interview started, we work with Greenlight Guru, another LSI sponsor. We also work with GE Healthcare on the imaging side. We work with Steris on the sterilization side. So we work with these third parties to ensure that the whole process is safe and validated to some extent, right? So it provides enough comfort for folks to adopt our machines at the end of the day.
It's fascinating. I'm definitely unenlightened when it comes to the 3D printing world. What does it look like in terms of how many hospitals, how many med tech companies OEMs, how many of them are utilizing 3D printing today?
Sure. So I'll think about it by use case. So I'll say it's, we're fortunate to be the market leader and have a high market percentage of market share. And because of our unique view or approach is extreme affordability and combined with the quality, regulatory, and performance that you would expect from a much more expensive machine. So in practical terms, our machines are $6,000 and up, right? Where the competition might be 100K and up. So we're a fraction of the cost, which leads to a lot more adoption and adoption by smaller companies as well who don't have the budget for $250,000 machine from a competitor of ours. So we have solo founders, we have physicians working on the side in their basements or in their innovation departments or in incubators and what have you. So we have very small companies who have adopted us. Thousands of them have adopted our machines, from everything from for R&D, of course, and then manufacturing aids, jigs, fixtures, injection molding, tooling, et cetera, and these end use devices I'm mentioning. On the larger end of the spectrum, the big medtech OEMs are a bit, because of their size, they're a bit slower moving, they're a bit more risk averse, and as a result, I think they're still leveraging us primarily for R&D, but we have a few confidential projects right now for bringing them over the line to end use devices as well. So
That's exciting. We can't wait to hear more about that then when
yeah,
when the time is ready.
hopefully everyone will hear about it when it happens, or when a few of these happen.
Sure. Can you indulge my intellectual curiosity a bit about the biocompatibility of 3D printed materials? How do you go about determining what to use, what's safe to be put in a body if you're making an implant? Is there a lot of intensive clinical research that goes into that, or are you working with known quantities here for 3D printing? Why don't you talk about that a little bit for me?
Sure, yeah. So I'll say that thankfully we have a very strong material science and regulatory and quality team. I'm not on those teams. I'm market development, so I'm building this market, but I know enough to be dangerous, you could say. So with that disclaimer, so there are ISO standards for biocompatibility, right? 10993 is a common one. There are various endpoints. So is it skin contact? Is it bone, tissue, dentin contact, mucosal contact? And then there's those columns, if you will, or those rows on the table. And then the other variable is duration, right? So skin contact for less than 24 hours, for up to 30 days, or for greater than 30 days, or essentially the way you break those down. And that applies to in the body or any other, classification, if you will, right? So bone, tissue, dentin, how long do you need that device to be used for? And then there is an endpoint to test to, essentially. So what we do is, because we have many machines, I mentioned previously, tens of thousands of machines in the healthcare space, we have a pretty good understanding from our current install base about where the requests are coming from. We wish we could make this sort of device. Do you have biocom testing for that? And over 10 years of receiving those requests, I would say we have some good market intelligence of our own to pull from and say, people doing a certain type of application seem to be asking for these requirements, right? Should we convert that into a new product or a new material? Or do we have an existing material that would meet those needs if we just do the biocom testing? So one example, I mentioned, skin, bone, tissue, dentin, mucosal. One outlier was ISO 18562 testing, which is specifically for gas pathway applications in healthcare. It's a mouthful, but we never thought about testing for that until the COVID pandemic broke out. And if you recall, there was a shortage of NP swabs, of masks, et cetera, et cetera. There's also a shortage of ventilators and sort of necessities and other innovation, right? And we had a number of our point of care manufacturers or hospital-based customers coming up with ideas on how to convert, one ventilator to serve multiple patients with similar conditions, or to convert other similar CPAP machines or BiPAP machines, which were readily available and not utilized to the same degree that ventilators were. So looking for ways to convert those into minimally invasive ventilators. And essentially one piece of plastic printed with our device was was needed to make that conversion happen, basically a connector for tubing from the BiPAP machine to make it a ventilator. But we didn't have this gas pathway application or this gas pathway biocompatibility testing done. So that one request came in. It was a pretty dire circumstance, obviously, one that we hope doesn't happen again. But that then triggered us to say, okay, here's the material that we have in our library that will likely meet those needs. We did the testing to the international standards, received the data back, and shared it with the world, and then adoption happened afterwards. So we're sort of in this I would say interesting chicken and egg situation as a manufacturer, in that the more data points we share, the more ideas come in, right?
Sure.
And it's always a fun balance to say, to wonder what customers might be, what people might be doing with our machines if we had implant biocom testing, for example. We haven't done that testing yet. And we might get there sometime soon, but I think the technology is sound. It's a matter of the regulatory environment, the biocompatibility requirements, et cetera, that we're now working on.
You mentioned applications, and that got me thinking, where are you seeing this, your 3D printing capabilities really being applied in orthopedics, cardio? Which sort of market are you noticing with your market intelligence?
Sure, yeah.
Or are you seeing your technology applied?
Yeah, I think within the realm of surgery, surgical oncology is resection guides or devices used to support surgeons in removing tumors is quite common. So orthopedic oncology, imagine any complex surgery across various specialties. So pediatrics is cross-cutting, right? So pediatric spine, pediatric neuro, these are cases that we see quite often. We have some visibility if we're allowed to. We don't have a full picture in terms of HIPAA compliance and things of that nature. We don't sort of pry into what our customers are doing, but we certainly hear about it when they need our help, or with orientation or printing support, things of that nature. So our data set is vast, and we're I would say orthopedics, vascular surgery, surgical oncology I mentioned previously, spine. CMF is very common as well. So there's the mandibular free flap operation is quite common. We have groups like Mayo Clinic, doing 500 plus cases a year, where they, using the same material of ours, print a surgical cutting guide for the fibula, remove that portion of the fibula bone, use that to replace missing bone on the mandible. Imagine there's a tumor on your mandible, you need that removed. What do you do here? Well, it turns out there's some excess bone in your fibula that you don't need, and you can look up the clinical data here.
Wow.
They'll use the cutting guide, size the entire implant configuration with the fibula, with a titanium plate in some cases, on a model of that patient's mandible or what's remaining, so they can pre-size that and then place the entire configuration on immediately, as opposed to doing all of that while the patient's cut open in the OR, right? So these are, you can't just have one CMF surgeon, but you need a full team to work together in that sort of case.
That's really interesting. So as far as the materials go, I'm curious, are you just working with plastics? What type of materials are you working with?
Sure. So we have an SLA printer, so stereolithography printer, which prints liquid resin. And then we have a powder printer, SLS, selective laser sintering, or SLS, which prints nylon powders and the like. These are effectively plastics made in two different ways. So we have nylon 11 and 12 are most commonly used for surgical instruments. And then we have what we call our biomed materials. So those are made in our QMS, made in the FDA registered facility, tested to all the biocompatible or the ISO standards I was mentioning previously, and they're locked. So our customers know that what they buy today in that material will be the same in 6 months or in 3 years, right? And we have FDA master files as well. So there's additional visibility into what's going into their devices, because at this point our regulatory team is serving our customers and supporting them with their own 510Ks for surgical instruments or other wide range of other devices that have been cleared in the market. And they need a level of compliance and traceability and
Sure.
quality control in order to do that.
Well, it's a great value proposition for when you're bringing on new companies to work with. They can just come to you for everything and
Yeah.
be assured that you guys have definitely dotted your I's and crossed your T's.
Yeah, and one thing that comes to mind is, as we're talking about this, is uh, this is across multiple technologies in healthcare and technology innovation, but typically you'll see teaching hospitals who have the budgets and the innovation labs and the R&D facilities and a mandate to push the limits in what's coming in healthcare, right? Now that they have machines of their own, we're seeing them publishing very interesting research about the cases I was talking about previously and many other types of applications with our machines. They'll publish that, and then 2 or 3 years later, we'll get a phone call from a medtech startup or a larger company saying, hey, we saw that, we've been working on that for a while. Following that publication, we're hoping to commercialize that sort of process or that sort of device. Can you help us with our submission, right? And it's this interesting sort of Gantt chart or diffusion curve where we're seeing point of care manufacturers or hospitals have, testing things out or being the proof of concept, publishing their proof of concept results, and then a medtech startup or medtech company will bring it to market, right? So the hospitals are typically not commercializing anything; they're just doing it, within the walls of their hospital,
Sure.
and publishing, and then they're happy. And maybe the tech transfer office gets involved and will license the process or the IP or what have you to a company. But in many cases, it's just a company saying, okay, we see that, there's no legal risk to taking this on, and we'll see what we can do on the public market. So it's this in some ways they compete with each other, but in many ways, I would say point of care also supports the medtech space in that way.
So how quickly can your device produce something needed at the point of care? Are you waiting a couple hours? What does the process look like?
Sure, yeah. So the two main variables for that affect speed are size and density, right? So in other words, the more material you need, the longer it takes. That's with our current technology. We are commonly used for trauma surgery cases and bone cement or PMMA molds, things of that nature, or emergency surgery cases. So certainly within 24 hours at the high end, most geometries, typically you don't need a surgical guide to be extremely large. So I would say in most cases we're talking about less than 12 hours, and in some cases. I'm trying to think about a small geometry. You could do a mandible model in 4 or 5 hours, for example. And there are techniques you can use to hollow it out if you need be, if it's just for visualization, for example. But there are plenty of tips and tricks that we share to get that speed to be even faster. But certainly same day. Yeah.
That's great. I mean, that's such a helpful resource, especially when you can produce customizable solutions, as you mentioned, for surgery, or to address an on-demand need within the hospital due to material shortages. That's fantastic.
And I'll add there and say, if you're thinking about production cases during COVID, again, not to talk about, I think we're all burned out from the pandemic, but just one example, we have machines that are the size of a microwave, let's say, for ease of reference. Machines that size produce globally over 70 million swabs because those were stocked out during the pandemic. So researchers at USF Health and Northwell Health in Florida and New York worked together with us to create a 3D printed version of the swab, and all of our point of care manufacturers and government agencies and even some medtech OEMs and dental labs even all pivoted during the pandemic to print these swabs, and 70 million printed in a handful of months. It's quite a number. So it's
Seriously.
really a matter of, think about one machine has a certain amount of horsepower, right? If you need more than that, you add to your fleet, and then you can produce millions of devices in a limited time. So it's there's a 1-to-1 ratio, but it's also very modular and sort of scalable in that way.
What's the rate limiting factor or variable that can increase or really increase how fast these devices are able to print out parts and implants?
Yeah, so I mean we're in a I think a unique position because we want to make sure that these machines are affordable at the end of the day. And I mentioned, I think at the beginning of the interview, some of our competitors have similar or identical technology, but it can cost 10, 20, 30, 50x in some cases. I mean, they might be bigger, they might be 5% faster, things of that nature, but they're not accessible, right? And our whole mission is to get more machines out there and enable innovation across the board, no matter what size company you are. So rate limiting factors might be laser power, for example, or build size, right? The more we're getting heavily involved in the orthotics and prosthetics market and corrective insoles, right? If you have diabetic full ulceration, or if you have some sort of pathology that requires correction of your gait, people are printing insoles in the tens of thousands per week. This is a function of how many machines they have, right? So one machine can do a few hundred in a week, whereas if you have a larger farm, you can do quite a bit more. So, I mean, really, our approach is more akin to servers, right? You can have one device, but then as you stack them, your bandwidth grows and your resources grow. So
That's a fascinating approach to deal with the sort of how many devices, the volume of devices you need to be able to produce.
And I will point out, it's, we have 40 plus materials available today across those two print engines. So one machine can be swapped out to use any one of those materials. So you don't need to, it's not just a one-to-one. So you have some flexibility in that supply chain as well. So you can have elastomeric materials that can bend and flex. You can have rigid materials that are used in the OR, getting hammered in the OR, for example, without breaking. So depending on the properties you're looking for and the color and the performance that you need, you can use one machine for the full spectrum of mechanical properties, as opposed to needing an entire, changing your entire production line over in that sense. So,
Gaurav, what are you looking to achieve here at LSI?
Good question. So, and really, because we serve biotech companies across life sciences, we serve medtech companies of all sizes. I think this is uniquely positioned to get us in front of both audiences. It's hard, we can all name the top 10 medtech OEMs, and they're accounts of ours, but it's a different thing to get in front of startups or promising startups. And I think promising is the key word there, because anyone with an LLC can go to any trade show that they want and get a business card printed for free and that sort of thing. But because of the due diligence that LSI does on the presenting companies, we know these are budding companies with either funding or revenue or both. Maybe they have our technology already, or maybe they are considering it. If they're making any sort of physical product, IoT or otherwise, they need to prototype. They need to think about their manufacturing line. They could consider additive for their final use products as well, or components of the final use products. And we have examples of that at our booth, across the prosthetic, the surgical arenas, and others. And we're here to ensure that they know they can consider us not just, or us meaning the 3D printing as a whole, not just for prototyping, but as they go from that concept to compliance to commercialization. So we're really just here to hear from all of them, meet and greet some existing customers, and then raise awareness with would-be customers.
Well, I wish you the best of luck spreading the word. I will definitely be swinging by your booth later today to see what you guys are doing, check out some of those examples of implants and things you got like that. Thank you so much for joining me in the studio today.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks, Nick. Appreciate it.